Alright, welcome. Today we're talking about estimating square roots. So make sure you got your name at the top of this homework sheet, date at the top right, and fill that bad boy in. So, if we're talking about estimating square roots, we need to know about normal square roots, and that's what we're trying to figure out what number was squared to give us this number inside the radical. So it's kind of just the opposite operation of square rooting. And so the first note is a little bit about that. A perfect square, this is a term we use for numbers. A perfect square is a number which has a whole number square root. So a perfect square example will be 9, because when you take the square root of 9, it's a whole number. It's 3, or negative 3. 16 is another example of a perfect square. It's a perfect square because if you take the square root of 16, you give a whole number, 4, or positive or negative 4. One way to think about that is when we talked earlier about the idea of squares and square rooting, we talked about how area of a square is made by multiplying length times width, but for a square they're the same thing. So like x squared would be the area of this little square here. So a way to think about perfect squares is it's an area which you could find a whole number side for. Great. Second part, if we are asked to find the square root of an imperfect square, or something that doesn't have a whole number as the square root, then the answer is an irrational number. So for example, we know that the square root of 9 is positive or negative 3, but if I asked you about the square root of 8, you know it's got to be less than 3. So what number times itself equals 8? Well, 2 times itself equals 4. 3 times itself equals 9. It's probably going to be pretty close to 3, so maybe it'll be like 2.98. But it's an irrational number, which means we can't really understand it. It goes on forever. So you can't get a complete idea of it because it just continues to go on. So it's irrational. It's not rational. We can estimate, though, by using nearby perfect squares and finding what two whole numbers the square root is between. So we're trying to figure out this one, and I kind of gave you a demonstration of it. To find out the square root of 8, what's it about, or how could I estimate it? Well, I know that 8 is between 9 and 4, these two perfect squares, so the square root of 8 has to be between 2 and 3. And we know that 8 is closer to 9, so it's probably closer to 3. That's why I made it 2.98. Alright, so let's actually put this into practice and do some examples. The first one. I forget this every single time. Is it a clear ink? I should know this. Okay, so here we go. The first one, estimate the square root of 85. So if we're going to estimate, we're going to tell what two whole numbers is it between, and maybe we'll tell which it's closer to. So the square root of 85 is in the radical, and let's think. That's not a perfect square, so it doesn't come out perfectly because I don't know any number that times itself equals 85, but I do know some numbers nearby. I know that 9 times itself equals 81, and then what's bigger than 85 that's a perfect square? That'd be 10 times itself, which is 100. So I know that the square root of 85 is between 9 and 10. And it's probably closer to 9. So it's probably closer to 9. But it's going to be 9 with a decimal. It's an irrational number, like we said. Sometimes we're going to have to think about a really big number. So in this example, we have 1,000. So if I'm going to estimate this, I know that this isn't a perfect square either, because it would have to be like 10 times 10 is 100. The only way I could have just ones and zeros if it was like 100 times 100, but that's 10,000, so that's too big. So let me think. Here I want to figure out, well, what two perfect squares is it between? I don't know the perfect squares up that far, but I can try and estimate and think, well, if we're getting near to 1,000, I know that 30 squared would equal 900. Let's try maybe 32 squared. 32 times 32. I'm going to do this mentally. And I'll talk it out for you. So I think if I have 30 groups of 30, I have 900. If I have 2 more groups of 30, then I would have 960. And then if I had 31 groups of 32, it wouldn't be 960, but it'd be 992. And then 1 more group of 32 would be 924, or 10,000. 1,024. So I know that the square root of 1,024 is going to be 32, and I can do the same thing for 31. So 31 times 31, 30 times 30 is 900. 31 groups of 30 would be 930, but then 31 groups of 31 would be 961. So the square root of 1,000 has to be between the square roots of 961 and the square root of 1,024. So it's going to be between 31 and 32. It'll be 31 with a decimal. And which is it closer to? Well, it's 39. 1,000 has a difference of 39 with 961. And 1,024 minus 1,000 is just a difference of 24. So it's probably closer to 32, maybe. If you want a square treehouse to have at least 42 square foot tiles, how long should each side be? So the area is 42. So to find the side length, it's a square treehouse. I can take the square root. So if you want to draw this out, that would be helpful. You're thinking that the area would be 42 feet squared. So we're thinking, what number do we multiply times itself to get 42? Nothing I can think of, but we can estimate again. So the perfect square, I know that's a little bit bigger, is 49. And the square root of 49 is 7 feet. And the square root of 36 is also close, and that's 6 feet. So if we wanted to have at least, this is important for a word problem to know, this has at least 42 square foot tiles, then how long should each side be? To the nearest foot, I should have put that, but to the nearest foot, it should be 7 feet. Each side should be 7 feet. So I'll include that. Each side should be 7 feet. I'll make this a little smaller so we can read it. And turn it a little bit for you too. So we're thinking about the side there. That would give us an area. We would need 49 square foot tiles, but we would be using at least 42. So we'd be using enough and not too many more, like a treehouse mansion. All right, I'm going to leave you with some problems on your own. Let me erase these bad boys real quick. That's a lot of work. Hopefully you took it all down and you're ready to follow that example and to do a couple on your own. Here we go with those. Estimate the square root of 130. So I just want you to tell me what 2 whole numbers is it between and maybe which whole number is it closer to, the square root of 130. You have to estimate because it's not a perfect square. 2 says if you need an oversized 4 square court, maybe you're going to play with a beach ball instead of just like a rubber ball, to have an area of about 230 square feet, how long should each side be? So this is like the last problem we just did. To the nearest whole number. So again, you just need to estimate it and find out which is it closer to, which perfect square is it closer to. So how long should each side be? You're going to need to find the square root there. Best of luck, and I will see you soon.